Okay, we've looked at some of the most important examples of Ottoman architecture. Let's take a quick look at some of the most important examples of both book paintings and other decorative arts. So let's start with calligraphy. There are many wonderful Ottoman calligraphers. This is one of the most impressive. Ahmed Karahisari was his name. Karahisar is a small town in Anatolia. And he died just after the middle of the 16th century. So he was working as a calligrapher for Sultan Suleiman, for instance. So what do you think is unusual about his calligraphy?
It's not very symmetrical.
Well, okay.
It seems very bold. Well, like, which thing are we?
I mean, the phrase, I suppose, that you're most common with is the basmala, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Yeah. But it's like it's very thick lines and then like it runs together.
Yes, it's highly compressed in some instances, although he's stretched out the scene of this. That's the stretching is typical, but the way in which these are compressed and made in this very, well, symmetrical pattern almost is most unusual. And more conventional type of calligraphy is seen on the left-hand side of the page. Square Kufic, of course, is it's more a matter of design than calligraphy. It's fitting the words into the space available rather than doing elegant letters. They're all at right angles, so they're all the same. But they are impressive. So, what does this read? Nope, it doesn't.
Well, it's in Tablet, so it's going to be his name.
Yeah, yeah. It's a tohra. What's a tohra, Isabel? You at least know the word.
It's like the Sultan's name is like title. Although that could be wrong.
Yeah, some of his titles. That's right.
It's sort of like a letterhead.
Kind of, exactly. Yes, this is not his signature, since he wouldn't have done this. This would have been done by one of the court calligraphers. But it's the symbol of his authority. They may have made seals with this as well that they could affix to documents, but this is a highly elaborate, calligraphed and illuminated example that you would find at the head of a document normally. So the overall shape that you have of this is very much the same for all of the Ottoman sultans. What differs are the actual names that you have squashed together in this one corner before the large sweep of the letters. But these vertical lines, the S-shaped curves that lead into this big loop on the left-hand side, they're similar in almost all of the examples. Illumination, remember, in terms of work on Islamic manuscripts, means the non-figural decoration, as opposed to European manuscripts, where it's usually used to mean a page with paintings of people. Now, we already saw some fabulous tile work when we were looking at the mosques. And the most impressive of all of the factories of the tile work that were instituted by the Ottomans was at Iznik, which is across the Bosphorus from Istanbul, not all that far from Bursa, for instance. And they produce not only tiles for the mosques, which we have seen, but lots of pottery as well. And this is particularly famous. There's a development that we see in the first half of the 16th century in terms of colors in particular. They start off using blue and white, basically. Dark blue, light blue, with the white inscription here, in reserve. That's the base of the plate, and they've painted around it to bring out the letters. So a very decorative Kufic inscription running around the edge, plus a traditional arabesque pattern in the center. Or you can have lots of examples with no calligraphy whatsoever. So what, Magad, what sort of source do you think they were using for the pattern that you see around the edge of this dish? Are there any motifs there that you recognize? Okay, there's a flower that is repeated regularly here. Here, that's a Chinese lotus, exactly, yes. And one of the very finest collections of blue and white Chinese pottery in the world is in the collection of the Topkapi Sarai in Istanbul. So the Ottoman sultans were great collectors of Chinese pottery. It's not surprising that we find them copying many of the motifs. But of course, even earlier, we've seen that was common from the Timurid period onwards, and the Mongol period, in fact, as well. Or, Nadim, any guesses on the origins of this kind of pattern, or at least some of the motifs here? Which part in particular? No, I don't mean East or West Chinese. I mean, which part of the decoration of this? All of it. I don't expect you to be that much of an expert on China.
The edges?
Yes, okay, the scalloped edges of the plate. That's a typically Chinese form for pottery. But any of the motifs inside it? When you say these, which?
The five shapes in the center circle.
Oh, these ones?
Yeah.
Those are medallions that have, I think, fairly traditional arabesques within them. I think maybe more this motif, which is a bit, yeah, it's a variation on the Chinese cloud motif that we've seen.
Could it also be how, like, in the center of the plate it looks like ripples of water?
You think so, really? Yeah. This is this tight spiral design. They actually call it by a separate name, golden horn type of pottery, because it's found in many other examples. The golden horn is just the inlet of water beside Istanbul. But I'm not sure that that's specifically from a Chinese original. So it's a mixture, really, I think, of traditional Islamic motifs with some Chinese ones, including the scalloped form. Isabel, what about this?
Well, let's see, the lines come from like a classical base.
They could, in theory, but in fact, this kind of grape and vine motif is one that's also found in Chinese blue and white. Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah. No, not at all,
like
not at
going
all.
with something
No,
different.
no. You're not familiar with the original Chinese form of this motif, but you're right. The motif is a classical one. But it's just the way in which it's portrayed here is more Chinese. And anything else?
The design on
On the rim, yeah. Yeah, in fact, the border design, and I think all of the vegetal motifs here are really Chinese. And here again, we have another scalloped outline. So all of it is very much like Chinese originals here. Dana?
Yeah.
What about this plate? Where did the artist? Where do you see a lotus?
Well,
Is it in the
you have tulips, yes. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 blue
And the edge
tulips.
of the clouds?
On the edge?
Yeah.
No, I think this is more a water motif. This kind of overlapping circles looks like water between rocks, perhaps. But again, yes, it's very much another one that is based on Chinese originals. And yeah, rather than being a lotus, this has a very stylized form of the Chinese cloud scroll again within it. So it's an imaginary flower which uses some Chinese motifs. And the cloud scroll is seen as a kind of bouquet at the base of the flowers that are springing from this element. Now, notice here as well that we have not just blue and white, but another couple of colors. What extra do we have?
Green and beige.
We have a sort of green and, well, this, I think maybe it's a sort of light
Mauve?
purple or mauve, yes,
Okay.
which you get from diluting manganese oxide. That's the color, if used in concentration, gives you black. But then if you dilute it more, you get this kind of purpley hint or tint to it. One other thing about this that's, let's see, it's different. No, this actually has the same arrangement. Okay, these first three have something in common, which these two don't.
Circle in the middle.
Hmm?
Scarlet patches.
Well, no, those
The circle in the middle.
That has a circle,
Yes.
but that doesn't.
The
Is,
last one done.
yeah, I'm talking about the arrangement of the decoration, actually.
it's in
These three are a pair, and these two are a pair. Sorry, these three have something in common, the first three.
The arrangement?
The arrangement of the decoration, yeah. So that's two that have something similar, as opposed to the way in which these three.
It's not symmetrical.
Yeah, exactly. And that's relatively unusual in Islamic design, particularly in pottery, unless they're figural scenes. But with vegetal scenes, you most often get a symmetrical arrangement, but not in the case of the Chinese-style grapes or the lilies. And in fact, that becomes a hallmark of Iznik. They don't that often have symmetrical arrangements on their pottery. We have it on the tiles, of course, because they're designed to repeat one after the other. Zainab, what are the motifs here based on? What's this in the middle? Yeah, what kind of bird? One with a big tail and a little crown on its head. You've never seen one? Peacock? A peacock? So the flowers that surround it, what sort of style are those in? We actually saw some in the tile work that we looked at in the last class. And I mentioned different kinds of leaves. Well, let me remind you again, this is what the Turks would call the Hataya style, which in Turkish means from China, Chinese style. But they're also using this jagged-edged leaf, the saw's leaf. And those are motifs that we've seen in the tile work in the Rustam Pasha Mosque, for instance, the last major one that we looked at. So here again is another non-symmetrical kind. Magid, so this one.
Ship.
Yeah, it's a ship. Ship with
Fish.
sails. Do we have fish?
Yes, we have a couple of
Or,
Yeah, jumping fish.
oh yes, yes. These ones that are jumping around the the sails. Yep, that's right.
Is there a cloud pattern on top?
Yes, here's a Chinese cloud pattern. And around the rim again is another Chinese water motif.
So which way is the wind supposed to be blowing? Because
Well, the sails are full, aren't they?
yeah, the sails are full.
and this is the front of the boat?
So like the center mast are kind of confusing me.
Yeah. Are those sails or are they something else?
Are they in
I think
there?
they're fish.
Fishing nets?
Why would
Watching
you
the
put
fish
fishing
falling.
nets
At the top of the...
They're jumping over.
if you drop it from that great height, you knock the fish out. When I don't know what those are,
It's
actually.
like the worst fishing boat ever.
I have a feeling they would be more likely to portray a warship of some kind on a plate like this. I may be wrong. So I really don't know what function that has, but
I was going to ask if it would have been possible if this was portraying the rare case when it actually rains fish.
oh, I know when the flying fish come out, and I don't think they go that high above the water.
No, because sometimes when they have, when a tornado goes over
Ah.
the ocean.
Yeah, they could. Okay, I doubt it. I think it's more an ornamental motif.
No, because I've seen video of that happening.
But there's also a difference between this and all of the previous ones we've looked at.
And then I can't remember.
Well, I'll just show the last three.
Okay.
So what's different about this one?
Symmetry. So it's also
Well, some of the others also weren't symmetrical.
Picture of an inorganic thing.
No, perhaps you're not seeing what's new here because we've seen some of the tile work as well. But again, I'll go back to this one, this, and then this.
Oh, much more colors.
Ah, one extra color. What's the extra color?
Red.
Red. Okay, this is the famous tomato red, which is actually slightly bulbous to the touch. It's raised above the surface of the other colors. And what's the technique in Iznik pottery, by the way? Is it overglaze painted, underglaze painted, cuerda seca, tile mosaic? No, tile mosaic is just an architectural technique. It's underglaze painted, and it's extraordinarily difficult to get this range of colors under the glaze and not have them run together. And especially the red. Nowhere else in the world, in the Islamic world, certainly in underglaze painting, do you have red as a color. So it's really a very impressive technical achievement as well. But then once they get this, it provides such a pleasant contrast. In addition to the other colors, they keep on using it. So, Nadeem, what about this one?
It's a, I don't know what, is it a pop flower?
It
Is it a
looks
pop?
more like a tulip.
The one up there, the red one.
Oh.
This one?
Is it chrysanthemum, hyacinth?
Chrysanthemum or carnation, maybe? I'm not quite sure what exactly that is. Yeah, we have the tulip in the middle. And was that a sort of foxglove or something? It's not necessarily that they were actually portraying real flowers all of the time either. Some of them are, like the tulip. But another good example where you have an asymmetrical arrangement of flowers in the center, and then it's surrounded by another Chinese-inspired rim with this water motif. Isabel, what's this?
It's a vase.
Not just a vase, because it has handles on it and it has a particular shape.
So it's a musk lamp? No.
Well, you're right to say it's a mosque lamp, and you're right to say no, because the problem with, of course,
It's,
lamps that
yeah.
are opaque is that they don't let the light through.
Okay.
But the handles on them suggest, yes, it is copying the shape of a lamp. So exactly how they were used is something of a mystery. I don't know if they just, floated the wick in the top, which would have provided some light out of the top of the vase, but it's not a very practical design for a lamp.
Is it hollow from?
Oh, it can't be. It wouldn't have held anything.
Could it have been a flower base and they just added the handles because?
It's possible they could have actually used it that way.
Maybe it's just a decoration.
Yeah.
But the handles are what make it look particularly like a mosque lamp, and the shape, the bulbous shape with the long flaring neck, exactly like contemporary lamps. So that's a little bit strange.
Has anyone ever seen what it actually looks like with a wick in there? Because maybe it produces some effect.
It probably would, yes. But it can't provide anywhere near the same amount of light that a transparent vase would.
Like surrounded with transparent lamps.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a very attractive object to own, whether or not you decided to light it. What about the decoration that we have on it?
Well, it's like a stylized lotus pattern.
Yeah, the one down here is
So it looks like
a bit like that.
To the other side, and then there's a medallion.
And an inscription around the top as well,
Yeah.
which again is something in this place in the neck that you would find commonly on mosque lamps. And then, of course, I've shown you some of the tile panels that we have in the mosques. Here's another very impressive example that was erected in the Harim in the Topkapi Sarai. With Persian inscription along the top. In what type of script? Anybody recognize this from? I think we had some in Mughal and Safavid works of art. Not Thuluth, no. This is, no, not Naskh, which is a simpler style, but Nastaliq. This is the one where they have exaggerated swellings and thickenings and thinnings of the letters, and also lengthenings as well. It's one that became popular in manuscripts in Iran in the 15th century in particular, and then in the 16th century began to be used in architecture. You have a few examples of it in Cairo in Ottoman Turkish inscriptions. But
How is this called again?
Nastaliq, which is a combination of naskh and taliq, but they drop the kh. And so in this case, they do have a symmetrical pattern, more common in architecture, as I mentioned, than on the pottery. Okay, let's move on to look at some examples of textiles. Talismanic shirts are one examples of these. One from the middle of the 16th century. You can see some inscriptions there. Zainab, what do you think a talismanic shirt would have been used for? What is a talisman? I think the word comes from the Arabic. Talisman? Is that? You don't know it? No. It's something that brings good luck, like a good luck charm. Or it could ward off evil. Same idea. Yeah. Yeah. If you ward off bad luck, you're more likely to get good luck.
I always thought that you might just end up with a neutral luck.
That could be worse, especially if you're on the battlefield. So these were worn as undershirts, under armor, when you were going into battle in particular, so that you wouldn't be harmed, you would be able to defeat your enemy.
It's at least another layer of armor.
They're made of, yeah, as it says here, cotton. Okay, painted in gold and ink, so not much protection. But if you go closer, you can see that in addition to the large areas of inscription that you have, in fact, the large areas of inscription themselves are filled with writing. And then they have things like magic squares and all sorts of inscriptions of many different kinds all over the garment. So there are several of these. Here's one with a couple of nice six-pointed stars. But again, if you go closer and look at this in detail, you'll find more of the very fine writing in the different compartments. But the most impressive examples of weaving, mostly of silk, were for the kaftans, the robes that the sultans wore. Dana, what about the motifs that we have here?
Chinese again.
Yeah, I think this is what they would also call hataya, the Chinese style, with a little bit of the saw's leaf, the jagged edged leaf appearing along with the other perhaps very stylized lotus leaves. But beautiful combination of colors here with the dark red background contrasting with a lime green foliage for the most part. Or you also have embroidered examples on cotton. Magid, what sort of motifs are we looking at here for the most part?
Tulip.
Yeah, this is the tulip one that we've seen so often in pottery before, with some other flowers and the same main combination of colors here with the emphasis on the red tulips, but then there's some green leaves in the background together with a little bit of blue. Or here's the full kaftan on the left-hand side with a detail of the same one on the right. Nadeem, what about this one?
Also tulips with other shapes that have tulips in fact.
Yeah, they're fairly abstract medallions, but they're filled with smaller floral motifs, yes, and connected by small rosettes regularly. And similar type of color scheme, the dark red for the background, although the main accent here is a light blue rather than the green, which is also present. Here's a slightly different one, which is one of my favorites, Isabel.
Yes.
What is the inspiration for the motifs here? What was the artist copying? What style?
The Hataya style?
Yeah, this is the Hataya style again. So these very large blossoms, roughly based on Chinese lotuses or peonies, together with the serrated leaf, the saw's leaf. And this is wonderful again in its lack of symmetry, for instance, designed to give an impression of the growth of the flowers in a natural way, but also in the colors. The black background is a strong contrast to the greens and the reds in this case. Or it might actually be a very dark blue background rather than black. Dana, we have another couple of examples of woodwork from the late 15th, early 16th century. Those kaftans, by the way, are also from the 16th century, roughly from about this time of Sultan Suleiman. What are these used for, do you think?
Aren't they Quran holders?
Quran holders, exactly. That's correct. So the one on the, how do they differ? Say we had these up in a slide test and I wanted you to compare these. What? Their shapes are different. What's the difference in the material?
Is that
Type of wood is yeah, certainly it looks different. I mean, I think really the only place where you see the original wood on the left-hand side are these tiny little bits of the feet.
Is it possible that on the left-hand side they use both ebony and ivory for the inlay?
It's all a veneer on the left-hand side,
Oh.
as opposed to. I don't think it's an ebony piece of wood that they have inlaid ivory into. I think the black is itself a revetment, a very thin revetment that they've applied on top of the wooden base.
Was that original or was it like a restoration thing?
I think it's original.
Oh,
Yeah. But yeah, so the materials. What is the main inlay material used on the one on the right?
ivory.
Yeah, it's carved ivory. And the one on the left, I'm not actually sure what the black inlay material is, but the white pieces are made of what mostly? Most likely. Mother of pearl, exactly.
So it's not clear.
No, you would have to look at more details to. It's possible that some of the flat panels are ivory as well, actually. But I think there's a lot of mother of pearl used too. So both of these have a domed part that opens and has compartments for volumes of the Quran inside. I mean, you can see the clasp here and the clasp here. So the top hinges and lets you get access to the areas inside. So here's another example that shows you it with the top closed and open.
Looks very Chinese.
Okay, what are the Chinese elements?
Compartmentation also looks Chinese.
Hmm?
The compartmentation also feels Chinese.
Yeah,
Comment.
yeah, it does. Yeah, so they have really 4 compartments where you can put Qurans of the same size into, and the space in the middle is left empty. But yes, there are lots of Chinese cloud scrolls on the edges of the medallions and also on the borders. But in contrast with that, you have the inscriptions around the base, at the top of the square, and the simple zigzag pattern. But yeah, the corners of the lid and the inside also, I think they're more in the traditional arabesque style, what they call the Rumi arabesque. Here is a throne that is preserved in the Topkapi Sarai.
How many people?
Just one.
Just one. but
Just one.
It would have had cushions.
Exactly, yes. No, you wouldn't have been expected, even though it's painted actually.
Well, that's so that the space in between the cushions looks nice.
Yeah, possibly. if
Because you can never arrange cloth to cover everything.
yeah. Dina?
You want big cushion?
That's possible. They could have,
You would have like cushions scattered.
but they might have had one in the middle and then 2 at either side as kind of armrests, I think. So yes, I think it is. You wouldn't have expected a sultan to sit on a wooden base. So what kinds of other motifs do we have here?
Tree forms?
Well, those little, well, we have 3 balls back to back. Are the trefoils, is that what you're thinking of? These ones? Yeah. I mean, this is actually originally a Buddhist motif, 3 balls together. Sometimes they use it with tiger stripes, which is called, in modern terminology, chintamani. Metalwork. This is a small sword or a long dagger that belonged to Sultan Suleiman.
Is it end like this? Or
Is it?
is it end like this? Isn't it sharp?
No, I think he's showing us the more decorative.
These are the details
Oh, okay.
of the part on top. So,
Well, it's the Chinese motif of the phoenix fighting the dragon.
exactly, yes. And this is the hilt, the handle at the top right. You have a detail of it here. So, okay, Chinese mythical animals, Chinese, the dragon versus the phoenix, and they're on a ground of Chinese lotuses in a spiral. And then we have ivory for the hilt that is inlaid with this gold arabesque, which is also a variation on the types of flowers that you have on the blade. So obviously a ceremonial piece. It's not something you would have been expected to bring into battle.
Doesn't even look like it had a sharp edge.
Well, you don't see much of it, but yeah, I think it could have done some damage further on. It comes to a nice little point, so you wouldn't want it to have annoyed the Sultan. Okay, something rather different. Okay. Yeah, now this is a very different aesthetic. Where you cram as many precious stones onto an object as can possibly fit on a gold background. And it's extraordinary that you have really this bejeweled aesthetic together with some of the well, more classical pieces, shall we say. I have to admit, this isn't a style that I like.
I love this style for the sheer fact that it looks like costume jewelry, and yet
Yeah.
it's worth far more than I will ever see in my life.
Yes, yes. So these are real emeralds, real rubies. Not sure they have many diamonds, but anyway, they're not semi-precious stones. These are precious stones. So an awful lot of wealth went into making this, and of course, displaying your wealth was part of the purpose of making objects for the royal court.
That could have fed so many people.
Well, no, you have to impress ambassadors, for instance, at receptions. So this is how you did it.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was expected.
Really impractical teapots.
That was expected. Yes, it's a canteen, and maybe it's just for drinking water.
Okay. Well, then why is there like
A little spout on the left.
spout?
Yeah. Don't think it was for tea. You wouldn't put it over a fire. This.
I would to see what would happen.
Yeah, the gold would melt, and the stones would fall out. Oops, there's another example of an ivory mirror with the back cut in extraordinary detailed carving. Again, in the it's a combination really of the Hatayist style, some of the Chinese leaf forms, but also with the traditional leaves used in the Islamic arabesque. And you can appreciate that better on this detail. With just a single turquoise in the center providing color contrast. But the leaves themselves, as you can see, have the veining or the outlining of the leaves very carefully carved as well as being carved in depth against the background. So it's an extraordinary example of ivory carving. Okay, we also want to look at some examples of painting. And we have a list in the handout. Okay, so the first name in the list is the name of the author of the manuscript, Natrakchi Naso, and then the name of the manuscript, Bayani Manazeli Seferi Iraqain, which has lots of Arabic words that might enable you to understand the title. What's Bayani Manazeli Seferi Iraqain?
The master's house?
No, Bayan, the making clear of the manazil, plural of manzil, of the stages in this case, of the safar, of the journey, the traveling to the Iraqain, to the two Iraqs. You have Iraqi Arab and Iraqi Ajam. You have Persian Iraq and Arab Iraq. Arab Iraq is the one we know as Iraq. Persian Iraq is northwest Iran, or the bit between roughly Tehran and modern Iraq. So this was an account of the campaign of Sultan Selim, who went with his army into those territories. And we have an artist who accompanied him and drew fascinating and very valuable depictions of the cities that they visited along the route. One of these we've already looked at in class. You remember any topographical image of a city in this kind of style? Sultanea, exactly. That was from this particular manuscript, and it's the earliest depiction that we have of the city, and obviously a very valuable one. So this, as it says, is a view of Istanbul. And it's obviously partially schematic. I mean, the city had a very dense concentration of buildings, so there's no way you can include all of these. But at the same time, there are lots of recognizable elements. Hmm? Which one?
This.
Here. Okay, that's not actually the Sinan Mosque. That's one that we didn't look at. That's the Masjid al-Fatah, the Mosque of Mehmed the Conqueror, which had one semi-dome. It was built earlier than Sinan. So this was built in 1537 or so. So this, in fact, was built before Sinan was active. This is earlier than Sinan. But there are some other monuments you might recognize. This one here. Another very big building, even bigger than this one. Exactly, that's Hagia Sophia. And anybody who's been to Istanbul might recognize this. This is the Hippodrome. And you have the original columns. There's an obelisk there in the painting, which is still there. We have a walled off area here in one corner. This is the palace, the Topkapi Saray itself. This is actually the old Saray, the old palace, which is now Istanbul University. And here, there is another area with a wall around it and a tower at the top. Perspective isn't that important. They've drawn it at a 90-degree angle. That's Galata, which was the European settlement outside of the city. Yeah. Across the Golden Horn. This is the Golden Horn, the inlet, and this is the Bosphorus here. So this is an extraordinarily valuable document for the reconstruction of the urban layout of Istanbul at this time. as well as being an interesting example of painting, of topographical painting. It's really a new genre of painting which wasn't practiced in Persian or Arab painting before. There are some rough attempts towards it, but nothing this descriptive, this accurate in earlier Persian painting. And here's the one that you've seen before. Okay, so now that might fit better into the sequence of painted manuscripts that you know. This is the one that has the mausoleum of Al-Jaitu with the minarets surrounding the dome. What was probably the Friday mosque of the city, with a portal with two large minarets and a dome. And then there's another shrine or mausoleum at the back, and the whole was surrounded by a wall and generic infilling of some domestic dwellings in the other parts. And continuing on in this topographical tradition, this is the next manuscript on your list by the same author. And this is Tarihi Fatih Siklos, so the history of the conquest of Siklos, and it's a view of Genoa, okay, the city that's on the northwest coast of Italy. So we have what are presumably representations of the Ottoman fleet here. Actually, these boats look rather different from the one we saw on the Iznik plate. I presume these are warships, so maybe maybe it was a fishing boat on the plate. And they're represented in a very different way from the galleons that you have inside the harbor. But we have buildings that look very different from the ones that we saw in Istanbul. So they're attempting to convey some of the feel, at least, of the European style architecture that they found in the city of Genoa. Although again, the scale is obviously not very accurate compared with the mountains that you have in the background. And this is the third one on your list. This is the Suleiman Name, so the Book of Suleiman. So it's an account of his campaigns. And we have a battle in Hungary, Mohacs. This is done in 1558. So we've seen a lot of, say, what painting from other dynasties would be contemporary with this? What have we seen that is from the same period? Safavid would be the closest. How does this differ from Safavid painting? Something that's useful to think about in case I, at the slide test, ask you to compare these. Well, the text actually, I think, is Persian, so that won't help at all. The Ottomans still, at this stage, had Persian as their literary language. They were just beginning to change about the middle of the 16th century into Turkish, but Persian was still very common at this stage. Dina?
Is it the style?
The style, yes. What's different about the style?
They're more, ones in the south of it, the ones where their body, they try to make it more realistic, however, the body and the shoulders are still,
The later Safavid ones, yes, we had the swaying bodies and the very sloping shoulders. That was characteristic. This is a bit earlier than those ones, though. This is closer, say, to the Khams of Nizami or the Shahnameh of Shah Tahmasp.
Nature looks much more restrained in this style than it does in Safavid.
Yes, it does. They're little lollipop-style trees, for instance, which don't look very realistic.
Much less tie-dye.
Yeah, more restrained. Some bright primary colors, but not really the riotous mixture that you have in some of the Safavid ones.
Why did he put a frame?
Why do you put a frame? This would have been on two halves. The binding would have been between them.
Yes, but in the previous paintings, they ignored it. They ignored that.
Yeah, that's true, but actually, it's unusual not to have a frame. This is standard, even in Persian and Mughal painting. It's normal. Another feature maybe that would be useful is the rigidity of the figures. So they're drawn up in a complete line here with almost no variation. That applies to the cannons. Not so much here, although they've arranged the rows of lances above the heads to be totally symmetrical. So they're more interested in order, in symmetry in some ways in the Ottoman examples. So this is the second last one on your list, Nuzhat el-Esrar by Feridun, 1569, just a little bit later. Suleiman receiving a European vassal. What sort of context do you think we have here? What's the scene being set, or where would it be taking place? Now this is a double page, so you're supposed to read these two together. So, I mean, what sort of setting do we have on the left-hand side?
That's camp.
That's a camp.
And he set it up outside the European city, which
Yeah.
supposedly, I'm going to guess, the capital of his vassal, or?
Yes, so
Perhaps
it's
the closest.
exactly, it's a European-style city. He's on a campaign, and his royal encampment with an elaborate textile surround for the circular tents within. This is his own personal collection of tents, but he has still a wonderful throne outside. And then, yes, this is the European style architecture of the town that's on the other side.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yeah, they set fire, so that's why the people are looking a little bit alarmed down below. Understandably.
They're kind of like, oh, look, it's a fire.
Oh, actually, sorry, that was a mistake. The last one was also another battle with Suleiman watching, but here he is, in fact, receiving a European vassal.
Well, that kind of makes more sense, since you wouldn't want to set your vassal's tower on fire.
That's what I was thinking.
Unless he really...
Yes, it does. You're right. So again, if you keep in mind Safavid painting, how would you distinguish this as being an Ottoman rather than a Safavid one?
Once again, there's much more restraint. And the background is not colored at all.
Yeah, that's surprisingly plain. The type of the turban will help. They still have red battens poking through, which at first sight might look like the Safavid Shia-style batten, but the turbans are much more elongated, and we have a couple of the figures behind the throne wearing a different type of turban. Anybody recognize this squared-off hat-like turban?
From the Egyptian?
A fez.
No.
It looks like Roman.
Yeah. No, this is actually a janissary headdress. This is the type, and you can see on some of the cemeteries or tombs in Cairo, you can see stone-carved turbans like this, indicating that the person buried there was a member of the janissaries. Tell you what, we'll finish with this one, which is, okay, the army marching with Sultan Suleiman's coffin. from the history of Sultan Suleiman, dating from 1580. Again here, any obvious indications that this is Ottoman rather than Safavid? The turbans, yep, that's a good clue.
Also the lack of natural decoration.
Yes, the rigidity, they've arranged the spears into completely regular lines. They have the soldiers in completely regular groups as well. So it's much more ordered than the more naturalistic depiction that you would have in the Safavid examples. Okay, for the last few minutes, I'd like you to do something we haven't done for a while, which is give me two things. One, something you considered important that you learned in today's class, and two, a question that you have about any aspect of what we have covered in the past few classes, say the Ottomans in general, or anything else.